I'm on board the legendary oceanographic ship Tara, a sailboat that has already circled the globe more than 12 times. It has sailed up the Amazon, faced the roaring 40s, the furious 50s, circumnavigated Antarctica, and crossed the Pacific lengthwise and widthwise. If this schooner has crossed the world's oceans so often, it's usually to make great discoveries hidden in a glass of water. Come with me, I'll try to explain the how and why without shouting against the waves or the elements. Take a glass of water you've drawn earlier from the Bay of Concarneau. In a Polynesian lagoon, just like in the Indian or Atlantic Ocean, it doesn't matter. Hold this glass of seawater up to your eyes, take a good look, look even closer. Well, okay, like this. You still don't see anything. But if you're a microbiologist like those who regularly board this floating laboratory and you have the right tools, then you can find things in there. Things that help us understand the past, present, and possibly the future. To really understand why, you just need to take a drop and place it under a microscope, and then you're transported into the wonderful world of the micron. Seeing a crowd that could make you long for the Paris subway, you're actually viewing part of the tiny, invisible ocean population known as plankton. This includes all organisms that can't resist the current and simply drift with the waves. A single liter of seawater can contain hundreds of tiny animals, like the ones you're observing right now. In this large, diverse group, we find many copepods, small herbivorous crustaceans about 100 microns long. Like cyclops, they have a single eye on their forehead, along with various embryos, mollusks, sea urchins, marine worms, or fish that start life drifting as larvae. These creatures, which constantly filter suspended and decaying organic matter from the water, collectively form zooplankton. But the diversity of organisms that can live in a single drop of seawater goes far beyond these microscopic animals. Because each liter of the ocean actually contains several tens of billions of microorganisms. There are likely more living organisms in this glass of seawater than there are humans on Earth. And the diversity of these planktonic organisms, whose size ranges from a few hundred nanometers to a few micrometers, is truly dizzying. Most are viruses and bacteria, but there are also many groups like cyanobacteria, acantharians, coccolithophores, dinoflagellates, and diatoms. These tiny, elegantly shaped creatures are all part of marine phytoplankton. A vast group of unicellular organisms drifting in the surface waters of the ocean is capable of photosynthesis. They use sunlight to turn CO2 into sugar and oxygen. Together, these microscopic creatures, resembling alien vessels drifting weightlessly in water, can significantly impact the planet. The proliferation of phytoplankton can literally be seen from space. In fact, each of the tens of thousands of different known species that make up this phytoplankton deserves its own video. Since you don't have your whole life ahead, I chose to discuss one group in particular, the most widespread in the ocean. My favorite are diatoms. When first examined under early microscopes, they were mistaken for crystals until people saw them move and assumed they were animals. People only began to see them as plants when they saw them multiply in sunlight. You predicted people would eventually realize diatoms aren't any of those things. They are protists, unicellular eukaryotic organisms, which means their cells have a nucleus like ours. But they are not animals, fungi, or plants. Diatoms are the main component of phytoplankton, and contrary to what these little transparent drifting boxes might suggest, these organisms do not live in isolation, but are in constant interaction with other members of the plankton, with which they can be in symbiosis or in competition. Diatoms evolve in a real field of battle and cooperation. Scientists have described around 15,000 species spread throughout all the oceans of the world. Their presence extends beyond the open sea. They're also found in fresh water, along coasts, in soil, and in snow. In these mud-flat images, you see large mats mainly formed by Gyrosigma fasciola, a diatom species just a few microns wide, whose colonies resemble a carpet, which often blankets the shoreline as far as you can see, altering our landscapes. These unicellular planktonic organisms have abilities that make nanotechnology experts around the world envious. Because their transparent and rigid armor, their external skeleton, is made of weakly crystallized silica, more commonly known as glass. Let me rephrase this for both you and me. These unicellular organisms can create glass at room temperature. While we struggle to run furnaces at 1,500 degrees, to be able, with a great deal of heat, to transform the silica present in sand into glass, glass that we use to make microscope lenses and to observe, amazed, that from the silica dissolved in seawater, a microalga, a remarkable engineer, does much better than we do at room temperature, and without any unnecessary energy expenditure. For humans, a glass skeleton symbolizes fragility, but for diatoms, it's a biochemical marvel, not a disease. On their glass armor, L also finds many microperforations that enable exchange with the environment and help diffuse light inside the cell. It's a bit like, with the first rays of summer, you could tan on both sides without having to turn over. This property of diffusing light rays that diatoms possess is being studied by human engineers to optimize the photovoltaic cells in our solar panels. If these tiny organisms still don't seem very important to you, just remember that without them, the Amazon rainforest would certainly not be so beautiful to look at. Each year, windless swells sweeping the Sahara Desert are estimated to carry material across the Atlantic Ocean. Some 27 million tons of dust, mostly made up of shells, diatoms, and other shelled microorganisms that were deposited on the ocean floor millions of years ago, before appearing above ground because of tectonic shifts, or gathering at the bottoms of vast lakes during wetter periods in the Sahara. Carried by transatlantic winds from one of the most desolate places on the planet to one of the most lush. These shell residues fall as dust across the ocean, where their phosphorus and iron help fertilize much of the Amazon basin. And then, without the existence of diatoms, we would have a hard time breathing. Take a deep breath. The vast majority of the oxygen you just inhaled was produced over the long history of life on Earth. Through the photosynthetic activity of unicellular organisms such as cyanobacteria or other species related to diatoms, the vast majority of the oxygen present in our Earth's atmosphere is thanks to the ancestors of these organisms. And even today, 50% of the oxygen newly produced on Earth each year comes from marine phytoplankton. And then phytoplankton, in addition to having created a large part of the atmosphere we know, also helps today to slightly slow down its warming. Because in photosynthesis, phytoplankton functions like tree wood or leaves. Incorporate and store the carbon from CO2 in its cells, which will in turn be eaten by animals or eventually end up settling at the bottom of the oceans. So that every year just as much carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere by all land plants, including tropical and boreal forests, and by all photosynthetic unicellular ocean organisms. To give you an idea of the absolutely gigantic amount of carbon we're talking about, consider that diatoms, which alone account for half of this phytoplanktonic fixation, can extract, on a global scale, several gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere each year. 5 gigatons is hard to visualize, so let's discuss it in terms of volume. These tiny glass capsules transport about 2 cubic kilometers of carbon to the ocean floor globally each year. The problem is that the most extraordinary blooms of diatoms mainly occur in the cold, turbulent waters of the poles, or for example, in the Arctic waters during spring. These unicellular organisms can reach 20 grams per cubic meter of water. However, with the rising temperatures of ocean surface waters caused by global warming, we could see a decrease in the amount of diatoms. This would reduce the amount of carbon extracted from the atmosphere by these organisms. In glass, ambience. A single drop of seawater contains countless microscopic life forms that can affect the planet's chemistry and climate. And I haven't even mentioned in this episode the fact that phytoplankton also indirectly feed almost all the inhabitants of the oceans. And now, I think, at least I hope, that you're starting, like me, to feel indebted to this colorful parade of unlikely little aquatic creatures. And, at the same time, to understand why. It's crucial to study and understand how they work and their environments. Our ignorance about the oceans remains vast, and the Tara expeditions were created partly to address these gaps. I'm not going to detail everything the scientists managed to capture with their microscopic mesh net, but instead, I'll tell you a little story. In 1013, after spending 4 years crisscrossing the world's oceans, the Tara Ocean Expedition collected several thousand plankton samples that were taken from the surface of the waves, up to 1,000 meters deep in more than 200 different places on our planet. By thoroughly analyzing the contents of these samples, research laboratories undertook what remains to this day one of the largest genetic sequencing efforts ever carried out on marine organisms. This increased the estimated number of unicellular plankton species in the oceans to over 100,000. and to boost oceanic viral populations from 16,000 to almost 200,000. By showing that 30% of the barcodes analyzed in the sampled microbial soup came from species that are likely still unknown. This colossal undertaking of genetic sequencing was both a giant leap in cataloging the tiny inhabitants populating our oceans and an awakening that highlighted the extent of our ignorance. In summary, a simple glass of seawater holds incredible vastness. Even now, few museums or documentaries show these unicellular organisms in proportion to their significance. Subtitles. They are at the heart of oceans, rivers, lakes, ponds, and mudflats. Wherever there is water, even in snow, you will find phytoplankton. Next time it rains and greenish puddles appear on your street corner, think about it. These colorful mats are made by cyanobacteria, fascinating single-celled organisms even smaller than diatoms. I won't talk about it since there's too much to say, but I love breaking my own rules. Just know that it's estimated there are 10 to the power of 24 cyanobacteria on Earth, which is, roughly speaking, the same number as there are stars in the observable universe, or 10 times more than the number of glasses of water needed to drink all the seawater on Earth. There is literally plankton everywhere in the oceans, on the continents, and even in our monuments. Coccolithophores are microalgae that look like stacks of plates under a microscope and, in groups, can color the ocean's upper layers. Patterns visible from space, such as these patches off the coast of Brittany, which get their milky blue-white color. Slightly reflective calcium carbonate, which makes up their armor. These single-celled organisms are indirectly builders of landscapes and cathedrals because these coccolithophores, like many other single-celled organisms with shells, not only did they also help build our atmosphere over time, but they are also among the great architects of our planet. Over immense periods, the fossilized shells of these photosynthetic microorganisms collected on the ocean floor and eventually formed the Trottas cliffs. And we also find them today in the stones that were used to build Notre Dame, as well as the Great Pyramids. The chalky soil of Champagne, which gives sparkling wine its aroma, is mostly composed of the remains of marine organisms. Would you care for another glass of seawater? Thank you to Christian Sardet and the Macronauts for letting me share their stunning images of tiny aquatic creatures. Visit them at www.planktonchronicles.org, and in the book Plankton, At the Origins of Life, you'll find more of these striking photos.